I was having a hard time once. I felt really good about that. And I mean more than just for work. I mean available for work, but available just for life to happen to you.
Caddyshack should have been a disaster. The first cut reportedly ran over 4 hours. The production was hit by cast tensions and chaos behind the scenes, and even a hurricane damaged the set during filming. Some of the movie's most iconic moments were never planned at all, and yet somehow it became one of the most quoted comedies ever made. So how did a film this messy turn into a legendary classic? And what really happened behind the scenes while the production was falling apart? Join us as we uncover 20 shocking facts about Caddyshack that completely change how you see the film. Number 20. The film was originally about the Caddies. The movie that most people think of as the definitive ensemble comedy built around Bill Murray, Chevy Chase, Rodney Dangerfield, and Ted Knight began its life as something entirely different. A coming-of-age story about 2 teenage caddies named Danny and Tony, who were trying to earn enough money to go to college. The story was rooted in genuinely personal material. Co-writer Brian Doyle Murray, who is also Bill Murray's older brother, spent years working as an actual caddy at a country club as a teenager, and the script drew directly from his experiences. The Haverkamp couple, the elderly pair who can barely strike a golf ball,
I never slice.
was lifted directly from a real husband and wife. Doyle Murray had watched struggle around a course for an entire afternoon. The Caddy Scholarship competition at the heart of the original story was based on scholarships that real caddies competed for at country clubs across America. What happened to all of that? The studio happened, and what they demanded changed the entire shape of the film. But before we get to the stars who took over, what was the single casting decision that the studio absolutely refused to move on without? Number 19. Chevy Chase. Being casting was due to a threat. Harold Ramis already had Rodney Dangerfield attached, and Bill Murray's involvement secured when Warner Brothers looked at the cast list and told him politely but firmly that it wasn't enough. The studio demanded a bigger name before they would fully commit, and the name they had in mind was Chevy Chase. Then one of the most recognizable comedic faces in America off the back of his Saturday Night Live run and the vacation franchise that was beginning to take shape.
From Saturday Night News headquarters, this is Weekend Update with Chevy Chase.
Chase was cast as Ty Webb, the effortlessly cool, philosophically meandering son of the golf club's founders. However, what the studio did not fully appreciate was the history between Chase and one of the other people they had just put on that same film. Because Chase and Bill Murray were not simply colleagues who preferred not to work together. They were the living embodiment of a grudge that had been building since 1977 on the set of Saturday Night Live. And that grudge was about to be transported to Florida, where the heat and the humidity and the nightly parties were about to make everything more combustible than anyone had anticipated. Number 18. The feud that started at Saturday Night Live and nearly destroyed the film. When Chevy Chase left Saturday Night Live after season 1, the show replaced him with Bill Murray. That sentence contains the entire origin of one of the most documented feuds in comedy history. Chase was the original SNL breakout star, the first cast member to become genuinely famous, and Bill inherited his seat and then built something entirely different in it. When Chase returned to host the show in February 1977, the tension between them exploded backstage in a confrontation that people who witnessed it still describe as viscerally ugly. By the time Caddyshack began production in autumn 1979, they had not spoken meaningfully since that confrontation. They were not at each other's throats on set, partly because the production was thoughtful enough to keep them in separate scenes, but the electricity in the room when both of them were present was not the comfortable kind. But if the feud nearly tanked the production, what came within inches of destroying the actual set? Number 17. The cast threw a party during a hurricane. At some point during the 11-week shoot, a hurricane made landfall in South Florida and hit the production so hard that filming had to be suspended for multiple days.
South Florida remains poised on the edge of receiving its hurricane. Hurricane David has already passed through the Bahamas, leaving flooded streets.
The set was damaged. Earthworms covered the floors of the hotel where the cast and crew were sheltering. Normal people, confronted with a natural disaster, assessed the damage and waited out. The cast of Caddyshack had a party. Most of the cast and crew were not from Florida and had never experienced a hurricane before, so they treated the whole event as an exotic adventure rather than a genuine emergency. Even Ramos, who was quietly staying sober specifically to prove to the studio that he was a director they could trust, found himself directing a film whose cast was frequently operating on very little sleep and various substances from the night before. The hurricane party was just the beginning, and the substance that defined the whole production wasn't hard liquor. Number 16. Cocaine was everywhere. Literally everywhere. Michael O'Keefe, who played Caddy Danny Noonan at the center of the film's original story, described the production environment with a specificity that most Hollywood memoirs would sand down into something more diplomatic. He said cocaine was everywhere, that people would come into your dressing room at lunchtime with salt shakers full of it, as casually as someone offering you a sandwich, and that nobody in 1979 thought anything was wrong about it. Chevy Chase, who has spoken publicly and candidly about his own addiction and recovery, said cocaine just seemed to materialize on the set of Caddyshack. He noted that at the time, nobody knew it was addictive. They just knew they had money to spend, and it was a great high. Harold Ramis was the notable exception. Staying sober while everyone around him was indulging was a deliberate professional calculation on his part. He knew this was his first directing job, and he needed to demonstrate to the studio that he was the responsible adult in the room. He has since said that his sobriety during the Caddyshack shoot was one of the smartest decisions he made as a filmmaker, because it led directly to the studio trusting him enough to give him Ghostbusters, National Lampoon's Vacation, and Groundhog Day. If the production was fueled by cocaine, what fueled the actual film? How was a 250-page script with no connective structure ever turned into a movie that runs 98 minutes and feels completely coherent? Number 15. The first cut was 4.5 hours long. When Harold Ramis sat down to edit Caddyshack, he encountered a problem that the 11 weeks of inspired improvisation had been quietly building the whole time. He had too much footage, too many characters, too many scenes of brilliant people being funny in ways that had no obvious connection to each other, and no clear through line that explained why any of it belonged in the same film. The first cut clocked in at 4.5 hours. Multiple editors looked at the footage and tried to find a film inside it. Nobody could. The improv approach had been the production's greatest creative asset during filming, but in the editing room it had produced a wall of material with no skeleton. Executive producer John Peters, looking at the wreckage, had a suggestion that nobody in the room thought was particularly promising. He pointed out that the gopher, the small, barely seen creature that appeared occasionally in Carl Spackler's subplot, might be the thing that could tie everything together. Give the gopher more screen time, use it as the connective thread, and the film might find a shape. Ramos agreed to try. The studio was asked for an additional $500,000 to build a proper animatronic gopher that could carry scenes. They agreed.
You laughs, huh? Yeah, that's right. Well, in the words of Jean-Paul Sartre, au revoir, gopher.
The romantic subplots of the younger cast members were cut to make room, and the film that emerged from that reconstruction, 98 minutes, propulsive, endlessly quotable, bore almost no structural resemblance to the 4.5-hour disaster that had preceded it. The gopher saved Caddyshack, and the gopher had started as a sock puppet. Number 14. The original gopher was a sock puppet on Harold Ramis's assistant's hand. During principal photography, the gopher that appears in Bill Murray's scenes was nothing more than a rough, matted, chinchilla-looking sock puppet operated by Ramis's assistant Trevor Albert, who would push his fist up through a hole in the ground on cue. It looked like something a child made for a school project. The production had not allocated a significant budget for the gopher because, in the original conception of the film, the gopher was a minor background element rather than the connective tissue of the whole story. When John Peters' reconstruction plan required the gopher to carry actual scenes, including the final moment where it dances to Kenny Loggins' "I'm All Right" over the end credits, a real animatronic puppet had to be commissioned and built. The studio provided the extra $500,000 specifically for this. The gopher that audiences have quoted and merchandised and turned into one of the most recognizable characters in comedy history began its existence as a sock. And the voice that came out of that gopher? not a gopher at all. The sounds the gopher makes are actually vocalized by a dolphin, specifically the same dolphin sound effects that were used for Flipper in 1964. The most famous fictional rodent in golf history speaks dolphin. The gopher was an afterthought that became the movie, which raises the obvious question about the man who spent the most screen time hunting it. How did Bill Murray end up being the person carrying this film when he was only supposed to be there for a few days? Number 13. Bill Murray was only on set for 6 days. Carl Spackler was not supposed to be a major character in Caddyshack. In the original script, he was conceived as a non-speaking role, a master of silent physical comedy in the tradition of Harpo Marx, present on screen but never given lines. When Bill Murray came aboard, Harold Ramis expanded the role slightly, but Murray was still only scheduled for a brief appearance. His total time on the Caddyshack set was 6 days. In those 6 days, he improvised approximately 90% of everything he did. Ramis has said that Murray was and remains the best verbal improviser he ever worked with, that giving him a situation and stepping back was not a creative risk, but a reliable method for producing extraordinary material on demand. If that doesn't make you want to immediately re-watch the whole thing, wait until you hear what the Cinderella speech was originally supposed to reference. Number 12. The Dalai Lama line was meant to come with a callback. It never did. The Dalai Lama's speech, where Carl describes an encounter with the Dalai Lama on the golf course that results in the promise of total consciousness as a gratuity,
the Dalai Lama himself, the 12th son of the Lama, the flowing robes, the grace,
was one of Murray's improvised creations and became one of the most quoted passages in the film. Ramis loved it. The studio loved it. It was left completely unchanged. Years later, Harold Ramis had an opportunity to spend time with the actual Dalai Lama in Tibet. He recalled the encounter with obvious pleasure. Monks around the Dalai Lama kept getting asked about the famous speech by Western visitors, and the answer was always the same. The Dalai Lama had never seen Caddyshack and had never played golf. The Dalai Lama, apparently, is the one person on Earth who does not get the Caddyshack reference. Now that we know what went into Carl Spackler, what was happening on the other side of the fairway, where the supposed star of the film was discovering that he had been quietly written out of his own movie. Number 11. Ted Knight was furious, and he had every right to be. Ted Knight was cast as Judge Elihu Smales, the pompous, status-obsessed president of the Bushwood Country Club and the film's primary antagonist. Knight was already a major television star, known to millions of Americans as Ted Baxter on The Mary Tyler Moore Show.
Yes?
I didn't say anything.
And he came onto Caddyshack expecting to be at the center of a film that was nominally about the conflict between establishment country club culture and the chaos that Al Czervik and his crowd represented. What he found instead was a production that was expanding the roles of Murray, Dangerfield, and Chase, all of whom had been brought in as supporting players, to the point where the actual structure of the film was collapsing around the character who was supposed to anchor it. Knight was reportedly disgruntled when his role was effectively reduced to accommodate the larger improvisational personalities around him, and he struggled throughout production with the improvisational approach that Ramis encouraged, because Knight was a trained actor who worked from scripts, and the chaos of watching Murray and Dangerfield and Chase create material spontaneously in front of the camera was not a process he had any natural relationship with. He also, reportedly, found the nightly party atmosphere alienating rather than liberating. He was not part of the social world that the rest of the cast was building off-set, which meant the on-set chemistry that made Murray and Dangerfield and Chase feel like they were having the time of their lives was something Knight was largely watching from the outside. Speaking of chaos, what about the one scene where a female cast member had to stand up to the producer himself? Number 10. The executive producer tried to spring a surprise Playboy shoot on an actress. Cindy Morgan played Lacey Underall, the film's designated temptress and object of multiple characters' affection, and she has been consistently open in interviews about the specific unpleasantness of the situation she encountered during the production of certain scenes. Executive producer John Peters, who was, among many other things, deeply invested in maximizing every potential commercial angle around the film, apparently decided at some point during the filming of a scene involving Morgan that it would be a good opportunity to conduct a surprise Playboy photo shoot without her prior knowledge or consent. Morgan refused. She stood her ground on set and did not allow the shoot to proceed. Now that we've established what was happening with the cast, what about the actual golf course they were destroying? Because the owners had absolutely no idea what was coming. Number 9. The golf course owners were taken out to dinner so the crew could blow up their fairway. The climactic scene of Caddyshack involves Carl Spackler detonating a network of plastic explosives he has rigged across the golf course in a final attempt to kill the gopher. The resulting explosions are enormous, comically disproportionate, and physically real, practical effects involving genuine controlled detonations on a real golf course with real grass and real fairways that belong to someone. The owners of Rolling Hills Golf Club had agreed to let the production use their facility for 11 weeks. They had not agreed to let anyone blow it up. Producer Douglas Kenny, who had been born in West Palm Beach and knew South Florida well, took the golf course owners out to dinner on the night the explosions were scheduled. While they were at the restaurant, the production crew detonated the fairway. The explosions were so large and so loud that a pilot approaching the nearby Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport saw the blasts from the air and radioed in, believing a plane had crashed on the ground below. And speaking of the airport, what was the one daily interruption that required Bill Murray's brother to stand on the golf course with his eyes on the sky for the entire production? Number 8. Bill Murray's brother had one job: watch for planes. The Rolling Hills Golf Club sat close enough to Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport that planes on their approach and departure paths regularly flew directly overhead during filming. Every time a plane passed over during a golf scene, it destroyed the audio continuity of whatever dialogue was being recorded, because the airplane noise made it impossible to use the take for anything other than a visual cutaway, and the mismatched audio required the actors to re-record their lines in post-production. John Murray, the youngest of the Murray brothers, not famous enough to be a distraction, but trusted enough to be given responsibility, was stationed on the set every day as an airplane spotter. His entire job, from morning until the last shot of the day, was to watch the sky, identify incoming or departing planes before they got close enough to destroy a take, and warn Harold Ramis in time to pause filming. Now, what about the grass? Because the course was supposed to be in Nebraska, and it very much was not. Number 7. The grass was the wrong color. Caddyshack is set in Nebraska. It was filmed in Florida. These two numbers create a botanical problem that the production team solved in a way that perfectly encapsulates the improvisational spirit of the entire production. The grass at the Rolling Hills Golf Club in Davie was a tropical variety, lush, dark green, and textured in the specific way that Florida grass grows under subtropical sun and humidity. Nebraska grass does not look like Florida grass. Nebraska grass is a cooler climate variety with a different shade, a different texture, and a different energy. An audience watching a film supposedly set in Nebraska and seeing Florida fairways would notice something was off, even if they couldn't identify exactly what it was. The solution? Spray paint the grass blue, not green, blue. A specific shade of blue that, when filmed under the particular lighting conditions of a Florida autumn, would register on the camera as the cooler-toned greenish blue of a Midwestern golf course in the fall. The production crew also built an entire second floor onto the golf club's actual clubhouse, a floor that only exists in the film and has never existed in the real building, constructed specifically for certain interior scenes that required the geography of a building with more vertical dimension than the one that was actually there. But what about the music? How close did Caddyshack come to having a completely different sonic identity? Number 6. Pink Floyd said no, and Kenny Loggins said yes. Harold Ramis had a very specific vision for the musical tone of Caddyshack, and that vision started with Pink Floyd. The band had just released The Wall, one of the most ambitious concept double albums in rock history, and Ramis believed their particular brand of atmospheric, conceptually dense rock music would provide the perfect ironic counterpoint to the world of country club golf. Pink Floyd declined. They were polite about it, but they were not interested in writing music for a silly American golf comedy. The production held open auditions for a replacement, inviting pop and rock artists to come in and pitch their take on the film's musical identity. Kenny Loggins walked in with a song called "I'm All Right." He played it for the producers and they hired him on the spot. The song became so associated with the film that the gopher dances to it over the end credits, and the combination of that image with that song is now so embedded in the American cultural imagination that most people who have seen the film cannot hear "I'm All Right" without immediately seeing a gopher celebrating a victory on a ruined golf course. The song that replaced the original on-set track is its own story. What was actually playing on the fairway when Rodney Dangerfield yelled at everyone to dance? Number 5. The original song was "My Sharona" by The Knack. It was replaced in post. During the filming of the scene where Al Czervik cranks up his boat-shaped golf bag stereo and tells everyone to dance, the song actually being played on the fairway was "My Sharona" by The Knack, one of the biggest hits of 1979, and a song that would have grounded the scene very specifically in a particular moment in popular music history. "My Sharona" was replaced in post-production by "Any Way You Want It" by Journey. The reasons for the change are not fully documented in public accounts, but the practical effect was the same. A scene built around one song had a completely different song dropped in during editing, and the actors were reacting to music that was not the music audiences eventually heard them reacting to. This is more common in film production than most audiences realize, but it is particularly striking in a scene where the whole joke depends on the spontaneous physical energy of people responding to a specific musical rhythm. What you see on screen is actors responding to one song. What you hear is a different song entirely. The joke still lands, the editing is seamless, and nobody noticed for decades. Speaking of things nobody noticed, what was Rodney Dangerfield's specific difficulty with the whole production process? Number 4. Rodney Dangerfield was a stand-up. Rodney Dangerfield's casting as Al Czervik was not the inevitable choice it looks like in retrospect. Don Rickles was seriously considered for the role before the producers settled on Dangerfield, a decision that was ultimately made on the strength of Dangerfield's multiple appearances on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, which had demonstrated that his particular brand of rapid-fire, self-deprecating humor translated to television audiences in a way that made him recognizable to the widest possible demographic. The problem was that Dangerfield was a stand-up comedian. He was used to walking onto a stage, performing his set, and walking off. The rhythms of film production, the waiting, the multiple takes, the coverage from different angles, the disconnected non-linear shooting schedule, the technical requirements that interrupt every scene before its emotional momentum can build were entirely foreign to him. He took a long time to adjust to how film sets actually operate and was genuinely frustrated during the early weeks of production. But once he found his footing, what he brought to the film was something none of the other performers could have provided. We're getting close to the end now, and the next fact involves the one person whose golf swing nearly ruined Harold Ramis's reputation before the film was even finished. Number 3. Harold Ramis went to his grave unhappy about the golf swings. For all the chaos, the cocaine, the hurricane, the sock puppet gopher, and the 4.5-hour disaster cut, Harold Ramis had one specific complaint about Caddyshack that he carried for the rest of his life, and mentioned in virtually every interview he gave about the film in his later years. Nobody could swing a golf club properly, not a single cast member, with the sole exception of Michael O'Keefe, who had genuinely learned to play, knew how to hold, address, or swing a golf club in a way that would pass muster with an actual golfer. For a film that was supposed to be a satire of golf culture, this was a source of ongoing professional embarrassment for its director. He had made the greatest golf movie in cinema history, and not one of the stars could play golf. He never fully made peace with that. To the end of his life, even as Caddyshack became more appreciated and more beloved with each passing decade, his greatest complaint remained the swings. Moving in, the next fact on the list will change how you see the first 5 minutes of the film. Number 2. The film is set on a real golf course. The Indian Hill Country Club in Winnetka, Illinois, where Bill Murray, Brian Doyle Murray, and several of their brothers worked as caddies during their teenage years, is the direct real-world inspiration for the film's setting. The experiences those Murray brothers had on that course, the characters they encountered, and the class dynamics they observed between the members and the caddies who served them are the raw material from which Doyle Murray's original script was built. On June 7, 2001, all 6 Murray brothers, Ed, Brian, Bill, Andy, John, and Joel, opened a Caddyshack-themed restaurant at the World Golf Village in St. Augustine, Florida. The restaurant was designed to look and feel like a country club gone awry, with Caddyshack memorabilia covering the walls, hidden gophers scattered throughout the decor, and a menu built entirely around golf puns: the double bogey cheeseburger, the pulled pork sandwich, the Caddyshack. Everything in Caddyshack traces back to something real, and nothing proves that more than the single fact that has been sitting at the end of this list the whole time. Number 1. The script came from real life. The most shocking fact about Caddyshack is not about the cocaine or the sock puppet or the explosion that fooled an airport. It is the one that explains why the film feels, after 45 years, like something you might have experienced yourself, even if you have never been within a mile of a golf course. Brian Doyle Murray's script was not fiction. It was memory, thinly disguised. The Haverkamp couple who can barely swing a club, real people he caddied for. The Caddy Scholarship competition at the center of the story, a real competition that real caddies competed for at real country clubs across America, including the Indian Hill Club where the Murray brothers worked. The class dynamics between the members who owned the club and the caddies who served it, observed directly every summer, across years of carrying bags and watching how money behaves when it thinks nobody important is watching. Harold Ramis, Douglas Kenny, and Brian Doyle Murray collectively drew on their shared experience as caddies to build a world that feels real, because it is real. The exaggerated version of country club pomposity, the specific snobbery of old money looking down at the people who make its golf rounds possible, the class solidarity that quietly develops between the caddies, all of that was observed by real people at real clubs in real America before a single word was written down. And somehow, impossibly, they made the greatest golf movie ever made. If Bill Murray had stayed for the planned few days instead of 6, and if the gopher had remained a sock puppet nobody ever fixed, does Caddyshack become the greatest sports comedy ever made? Or did this film need every single thing that went wrong in order to become everything it got right? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.